put this back then. All right, got there in the end. Make sure I'm going to be able to. Got my cookie. So this is a little bit of a different talk for me because I don't have Christmas lights or IoT devices to set up. So to try and make this a little bit easier, I've kind of recorded the demos and things. That way I don't have to focus too much down here. So this talk, the title of this is Building Airplanes in the Sky, which will become, that'll make, actually that's probably a bold claim. It might make sense in a minute. Shh, no spoilers. It's funny, actually, with this, I mean this in a nice way. Probably more people in this room will get the reference than in other rooms where I've tried to talk about that. Bit of an age demographic going on there. With serverless and low code. So, and actually, I was going to put no code, low code, but that line between no code and low code is out. Don't worry about it. So, actually, I'll probably need to stand here, won't I, for the mic. So here, we'll see how we go. Let's see how this starts to make sense. So we have a problem. We can't write enough software is basically the problem. Okay, the way we build apps just doesn't work. We've heard tonight, two of our great Microsoft partners screaming for people, and our customers are doing the same, right? You just cannot hire enough developers. I'm working with another customer who's got 100 open headcount for their cloud practice, right? That's not for other customers, but them, right? So we just cannot get enough people. And there's lots of interesting metrics there and lots of reasons for it. And I guess the question is, what do we do about it? We can obviously train more developers, and we can do that, but that takes time and may not really be the solution, because obviously more people adds more cost to projects. And I stole this from Satch's deck from Build because I just thought it was great. There's all these numbers and things, but it basically comes down to this, right? There's what we can build, all the stuff we need to build, and really that means we only build that much, right? And I'm seeing this working with a lot of customers. That might mean you don't do things is one option on how to respond to this. Another is you do it, but maybe you don't do it the way you really should do it. So you do. You have your stealth IT, or maybe you have a fix. Maybe you run it all off a spreadsheet, because we've been doing that for quite a while. Or maybe you use some of the new platform tools, the new no-code kind of solutions, but that only gets you so far. So that's kind of the problem space. Or, and probably the worst I've seen is people who are building apps, but they're just absolutely so under the pump that everything is a tactical short-term decision. So effectively what it is, you're building that horrible code, that horrible solution that someone else probably is going to have to support for the next 10 years. Because as long as dev projects seem, they take this long, and those apps live for this long, right? So we're building a lot of legacy and making a lot of decisions because we don't have enough people, right? And yes, we can train more developers, but I'm hoping, and I guess the focus of this talk is, maybe we can just write less code to get the same outcome. Not that no code, low code is the solution, but potentially it's part of our toolbox, which reduces the amount of code that the developers need to write so they can focus on the bits where it really matters, and they should be writing code. And the problem's not new. If you're around for a while, you will have known. I love this. I found this ad in a Byte magazine from '95. Not one more damn line of code. So, there was, and of course there were lots and lots of tools, think through the 90s, lots of tools. And I know I got a contract with a nameless department here in Queensland. When I turned up on day one, they told me this. Hey, this seems a bit strange. What are they talking about? Let's think. Mid to late 90s, you go to work for a government department. What could they be talking about? I'll give you a clue. I'll give you another clue. So this was a relatively small department. They did a survey of database files, and that's how many Microsoft Access apps they had. Now, as developers or architects, we can sit there and go, oh, that's horrible, you shouldn't have done that. They didn't have budget to go away and spend millions of dollars. These things actually represented tremendous business value. It was the only way they could do it, but they paid the price, right? So you had to end up with these little silos. And as Damien mentioned, this wasn't unique to this. If you go forward into those around in the early 2000s, we had the dot-com boom and we had the start of e-commerce and all this great stuff. We still kind of had the same problem.
I like to build planes in the air. I grew up wanting to be on a wing, wanting to be at this high. But that's the temperature of the altitude will reach 60 below. It's crisp, it's refreshing. You never know what you're going to come across up there. Canadian geese, mallards, owls, people back here.
My favorite guy is the guy getting the coffee. This guy.
I love this job. I look over there and I see that little kid. I look in his eyes. That's all the things I need.
Good old EDS. They were Super Bowl ads from early 2000s. There's about 4 of them. Go and look at them on YouTube. There's no good quality ones, which is a shame. But it was that same sentiment, you know, like in those days, we're trying to build these things as we're going. Pouring coffee on the guy who's, you know, kind of, you know, interesting analogy for software development. So kind of took that thinking about, hey, we're still thinking about this same stuff. There's all these great new solutions. So it seemed like a good idea at the time, and it was fairly late at night when I had this idea. So I thought, okay, let's take that idea of building planes in the sky and let's try and apply it now. Let's try and look at what the technologies we've got and how that can help us. So I came up with a scenario. And here's our scenario. We've got a customer called Contoso Air, because everything in Microsoft has to be Contoso if it's not called AdventureWorks, the law. Okay, so Contoso has been a small tourism company. They take charter flights around Gold Coast and Brisbane. But they've got a new owner who's super excited. He's watched lots of TED Talks and he wants to do lots of amazing things. Doesn't necessarily understand how long it's going to take to build them. And in our scenario here, he's on the Gold Coast. He's flying to Brisbane. And basically, he's given us some great thought starters that he'd like us to do by the time he gets to Brisbane. So we're going to see if we can use some of these solutions to build what he wants, or at least an MVP, before he gets here. For a couple of important reasons. One, I can now explain to my wife why I had to buy all those new controllers for Microsoft Flight Simulator. But it's just there as a bit of a reminder of time pressure, right? If we sit here and talk about no low code productivity, it's all great, but you know, these things always happen under a deadline. So he's given us a couple of scenarios. We're going to talk through them, and then we're going to build out 3 of them and see if we can get them done before he lands. So all being well, we'll get there. So given this is the Azure user group, not my best takeoff, by the way. I was trying to record in video and doing other things. So if anyone feels airsick, I apologize. Obviously, given this is the Azure user group, I don't know, hands up who's actually done some hands-on stuff with Power Apps or the Power Platform. Oh, that's good. A fifth-ish. Probably the thing most people have used is Power BI. It's been around the longest. But Power Apps is the no-code, low-code, depending on where you draw your line, part of that platform. And importantly, it really is kind of the glue layer between Azure and the Microsoft SaaS offerings of Microsoft 365 now and Dynamics 365, which I don't know if anyone's noticed, but during COVID, this thing has just exploded, right? As people have realized their on-prem systems and their traditional way of doing doesn't support remote working and things. The number of migrations to Dynamics 365 is just unbelievable. And it's a great product. But there's obviously a lot of other bits of the enterprise that still live in applications and things, be they on-prem or be they Azure. Power Platform is really that glue layer. There's a lot of parts that make it up, and of course I didn't update this since build because there's a few new ones. But really the key ones, and just to understand what our Power Apps, obviously we're going to have a look at. Power Automate, which if you've seen Logic Apps, you can think of it as a more user-friendly, easier to use version that runs on top of Power Apps. Power Automate. Oh, sorry, that is Power. Power Virtual Agents, which was interesting to hear about bots and the Lewis changing. So Power Virtual Agents is basically a no-code way to build conversational bots. Like if you're doing it from a code first point of view, you use the bot framework. If you're doing it in a no-code way, you'd look at Power Virtual Agents. And it's taken me a long time to wrap my head around it. But the other one I want to call out is Dataverse. Silly name, but naming things is hard. If you've heard of the Common Data Service, it was called before. It had another name before that, which I've completely forgotten. It doesn't make any sense, but it's super cool and super important, particularly when we want to talk about Azure. So I just wanted to position some of the things you'll see. That's it. And the other one we'll talk about at the very end, PowerFX. Who likes functional programming? No one likes functional. Who knows Haskell? Oh, okay. Haskell. I don't push anything. I don't push anything. Stay tuned for that. Okay. So that's what we're going to do. So let's check varieties over. Actually, Dan, where do you live on the Gold Coast?
Nerang.
Oh, Nerang. Sorry, off to the left. I think he's near Surfer. So okay, he's a little low and he's a little all over the place, but that's okay. The pity Adam's on here. We fly over his house in a bit. Which town? Neither. Yes, but I turned the radio off, so we're fine. Okay, so one of the use cases he gave us is Maria. I want to talk about Maria. So Maria is the operations manager. So she knows everything about everything. And you have those people that they're always the first person you go to ask about stuff. And Maria loves Excel. She's run her operational business of very complicated Excel charts with conditional coloring and all sorts of things for years. She's kind of the linchpin, and this spreadsheet has become the linchpin of her world because although she does all these super complex things with her spreadsheets, she's got two main problems that annoy the heck out of her. One, people always want to keep ringing her to find out if a plane's available for them to go and charter, because there's a whole lot of reasons something was supposed to be but isn't. And the other one is that, particularly at the moment, the rate they charge, normally didn't change very much, but I don't know if you've noticed, but fuel prices are a little bit volatile right now. And fuel costs are a big part of aviation. So that's being changed very frequently. So when people ring in to book, they're often ringing up Maria to get the latest rate to know what to charge her. So she kind of estimates, look, if we could take away that pain for her, that would give her back hours every day and stop her yelling at people. So, okay, let's see what we could do about that. Because if we were going to take, if I put in my developer hat, I said, okay, well, let's build a SQL database, say, let's build a web UI, let's build something like that. And that's great, but the bosses, as we saw, already over the Gold Coast, and he's going to be here in about 30 minutes. I haven't got time to do that. So we're going to do a Power App, because this is kind of Power App bread and butter, right? When you talk about things that live in Office, this is where they live. So for those that haven't seen it, we're going to talk about some other options. Literally, you log into the Power App portal. We go in here and say, okay, I want to make an app from Excel. I've stored that Excel file on my OneDrive. I go and find that Excel chart. There it is. Sheet. Well, that's it. And we pick the table within that sheet. We define it's going to go away and have a look at it and go, oh yeah, that looks all right. We can figure that out. What it's going to create for us is a very basic app. It's your basic CRUD app. Right? So you can see here we've got possibly not the most interesting information selected. But before we even worry about that, let's just go and run it. So now we're going to go in and run this app directly in the thing. You can see it's got a search box, it's got a refresh, got some options to restart. We can go and add new records, all that kind of thing. We can go and look at the details of a particular plane. Again, it's not particularly attractively formatted by default. Go and have a look at that. But super functional in whatever that was, 30 seconds. Okay. So not a bad start. And bear in mind, whenever we do something here, whenever we add a record, that's going to go and update Maria's spreadsheet. So her spreadsheet, she doesn't have to change the way she works, but everyone else can use this app, even if she doesn't want to. If we go and have a look what it's actually created here, you can see it's created different screens for each of those things. Each one has a field. And if you have a look at the kind of formatting controls, if you've used Excel or Word or PowerPoint, you can kind of deal with those, right? Alignment, bold, left, right. You know, you could go and do stuff in there and make your life, make the world a better place. This particular layout's not super nice, so we might go and pick a different one, like a one with a gallery, which is great. Now we've got like an image, but still not super interesting in terms of the fields it's picked. So we can just go in, it already knows what the fields are from looking at the spreadsheet. So we go, okay, well, let's go and change that top titling field, the aircraft registration. That's much more useful. The second one, what's everyone ringer about? Is the damn plane available? Okay, let's make that a subheading. That's really good because, they don't really care about the engine type. Yeah. Cool. Now, what it's actually put in there is a sample image because it obviously didn't know which of the fields of ours, contain an image. There was one there. So if you have a look, what those other, I actually missed it a bit there, but what those other fields, if you use Excel or whatever, you'll probably recognize this kind of little formula bar. So we just go this item dot, and we get image, text completion to say, right, we'll use the image URL form, and now we've got an image. So again, another minute or so, and got something pretty functional. And although that we haven't gone through this same process for the other screens, we could give this to people now in her organization, and that will probably stop, 80% of the phone calls she gets every day. The only other thing we've got to do, you can see there in that sorting search box rather, it actually wanted which fields do you want to search on, which of these fields, so we just add those in. It's tough. Move along. So from someone who's used to dealing with Excel, PowerPoint, those kind of things, that's relatively easy. We run it now. We've got our nice picture there. We click on our search item. We can type in a registration tag, for example, or maybe the status we want to search on. Pretty quick and easy. So they can use that. Cool. So. Clicky. Oh, there it's going. Now we could do a whole lot more. We're not going. This isn't a Power App session, right? But we could go and create some flows, just like we could in Logic Apps, right? So we could add a button that would go and send an email. Damien loves his emails. But equally well, we could go and send a push notification to everyone who's using the app. Maybe something's changed about the plane, or we want to tell them about it, or something like that. Send an approval, do all sorts of, that workflowy stuff. We've been able to do that without having to use our developer resource, because they do have a developer, but he's super, super busy, like all good developers. Not only that, if we wanted to go and look at, well, it's working, but you might want to go and have a look at if it's performing a bit slowly or something's a bit wonky. You can go in, you can turn on the monitoring option. Then when you go back, we go and run the app again, go and do some little things. Let's go and search again. Go and do some browsing, do some editing, and all these things are feeding data into that monitoring sort of solution. So, this is Splunk, this is an App Insights, but it gives, can give us some information to understand what's going on our app. So we can come back here and see all the events from the app, what was triggered, how long it took. Most of them were just within the app, but when we did save an update, you'll see there on this one, we can go over and see, okay, here's the details that changed, because everything here is an API. So when you're calling back into the Excel sheet, so we can go and have a look at the request, the response. We can do all those kind of things. So we can do some troubleshooting to understand. Now, this may or may not mean an awful lot to the person doing this, but our pro dev was trying to help them do something. They could come in maybe and have a look and see and understand what's going on. Cool. So we've got an app. Oh, he's back. Where is he now? Superman? Would that be somewhere near the strawberry farm, I think? Okay. Yeah, I think so. He's getting close, but that's okay. We've got one use case down. We've only got 2 to go. We're pretty good. So that was fine. We had a data source. We created something just on top of that. So we didn't have to do a lot of thinking because the app could kind of understand, oh, that's the data you got. I can make some intelligent guesses. This one's a bit different. Now we want to, this is net new. We've got John, our customer service rep. He's super popular all the time, even early in the morning. That doesn't get annoying at all. And, you know, John cares about customer service. And after people go on their scenic flight, he sends them an email. You know, please fill in our survey form. But yeah, guess what? Like us, they probably ignore them. And, you know, being in a very competitive industry, that's a bit of a problem because if someone didn't have a good time and they go and post on social media, by the time you find out, it's too late. So John had this great idea. Look, if I just had something on my phone or a tablet that when they come off the plane, I go out and I meet them and I ask them how it went. You know, I could make just something really quick and easy. We can capture a few data points. That would be great and give us the opportunity to do it. John's more a PowerPoint kind of guy. We can all kind of drive PowerPoint. So we sat down with him and said, okay, let's just mock up what it is you want. What is it you want, John? So he said, well, something like this, right? Just we'll record so we know which flight it was, what date it was, a couple of data points and comments, and that's it. We're not going to stand around. Okay, so that's great. That's a mock-up. So we could go and take that to our developer, or maybe someone super skilled in Power Apps and they could build it from scratch. We don't need to do that anymore because we've had build. So we now have Express Design. Basically, give me your picture, your PowerPoint, your mock-up, and I'll create the app for you. Sounds okay. Let's see if it works. So just like before, we clicked on Excel. Now we're going to click, I'll come back to Figma in a sec. We'll click on Image Preview. Image, which is in preview. Preview. You know what I mean. Okay. And it gives you some nice little blurb here going, look, this is really for simple forms. If you've got a 10-page department form, I won't name any departments, that's probably not going to be so good. So we go in here. They do give you some sample images to give you some ideas of, look, this is the sort of thing we're expecting. And you notice the, you know, fields can be vertical or horizontal or however you want to do them. So I've taken a screenshot that we saw before of that that we came up with in that little PowerPoint. We go next. Okay, so what that's done is run an AI model over that. So if you've used things like Form Recognizer in Azure, and you can see what it's effectively done is what all our good AI models do. They have a guess. You know, it's not about being accurate. It's about being how confident are you. So you can see it thinks, okay, these are text labels. These things look like inputs. These look like ratings. And then there is some built-in kind of guidance there to give you some idea of the sorts of things it's looking for. Okay, but in this case, yes, it picked it as an input, but I actually want that to be a date picker control. So I just go and re-tag it. So you're just correcting the AI to say, yeah, I know you thought that, but this is what I want it to be. Now, we don't have data. We didn't start from a spreadsheet. What are you going to do with the data you capture? So you can either use that Dataverse thing we've heard about, or just don't wire it up. I'll figure that out later. But in our case, we want super simple. He's probably over past Dreamworld by now. So we pick Dataverse. So then the next thing is, okay, it's going to run AI to try and work out, well, what should the structure of that data be? So not only is it picked up that that's an input and that's a field label, it's kind of made a guess that, hey, that goes with that and that goes with that. So again, same thing, you can tag it and change it. And you can see here it's came up with that because we changed the control to date type, date picker. It's changed that to be the date type. And even though it's a rating with stars, it's gone, oh, you probably want to store that as a number, 1 to 5 or whatever. It's like, yeah, that seems reasonable. I could rename all those, but we won't worry about it for now because we're all about speed here. Gives you some last things. You can go and gives you a little thing there, customize the data type, validate that. Oh, all looks good. Create. And hopefully. Good. So again, oh, that's the downside of pre-recorded videos, isn't it? Basically, it did a decent job. All the controls were there. We could go and format them the same as what we did before. Now, not only, actually, let me just go back a tick. Manual intervention. This is when Todd tries to get too clever. Sure, I can jump. Let me jump to the right spot. It's a bit chilly. No, that's all right. But once I've saved that app, I can publish it. I can go to my phone. So this is on my iPhone. Fire up my Power Apps. Go and click on the new customer experienced Power App that we just created. And there's the form there running just as well. Again, go and put in some data, pick some dates. Got a nice responsive little app. So nothing super clever, but the idea was that potentially unlocks a whole lot of business value. So how are we doing for time? Oh, that's the city up there. So I'm guessing this is now Cravat. Yeah. Okay. So he's getting closer. All right. We've got to keep going. Okay. First two cases were bread and butter, no code, low code platform, right? Easy to do, lots of data source. And that's really where Power Apps has exploded, right, during COVID. I mean, if you've ever had to sign in on any COVID app from a government agency or check off thing in an airport, odds are it was Power Apps that did it. Not just because it was super fast to deploy, but the rules were changing every darn day. And they needed to push out those changes, and they needed the data. They needed to have really good governance on data and things like that. And they just couldn't do that by hand building apps. So even though they're fast, it doesn't necessarily mean it's unimportant or trivial data they're collecting. Now we're going to shift and say, okay, well, that's great. What about where we actually need to do some integration into our core systems? So let's take use case 3. Here we finally meet Jaden, our lead developer. He's actually our only developer, but he's a lead developer. He keeps telling me. So he looks after our Azure dev as well as integration, because they do a lot of integration work. And he was the guy that moved our wonderful Access 95 databases into SQL. Did a fantastic job. He kept showing me his ER diagrams and everything. It was fantastic. But now Maria comes along, and that new app she's built, she wants to add some data to it. So not just seeing the details of the plane, she'd like to be able to see every flight it's done in the last week or so, right on that page. So what could we do? All right, we've got a SQL database. Do we just connect the Power App to the database, SQL database? We could absolutely do that. But this is kind of a core system. We don't necessarily want the SQL database to be exposed outside of enterprise. So being, cloud native people, what do? We stick an API in front of it, because that's what makes life good. So we want to see how easily we can do that, and how we can connect that back to Power Apps. So in this particular case, we've got a really simple database just with a couple of tables. And then we've got, because, life isn't complete without a good stored procedure. So he's whipped up a good stored procedure to return just what we want, what you like. Okay, and then we've got to decide, okay, API management, that's a bit of a no-brainer. We'll do that because, why wouldn't you? It's my favorite service, even better than sending emails, just saying. We've got our SQL database. Now, what we put in the middle really doesn't matter. That's kind of situational. Okay, if this was a big complex thing, you might have done microservices and deployed in Kubernetes. You might deploy it as a web API on app service in Node or Java or whatever you want to do. Or you might use some of the lighter weight options. So you might use Azure Functions and take advantage of the binding mechanism. So you really have to do very, very little work. That'd be a good choice. But, he's already headed towards the city. So I'm going to go with Logic Apps, because Logic Apps make Dan happy, and that's part of my mission. So what do we do now? We're going to create a Logic App. Now, this is going to be an API. So it's going to be triggered by a HTTP request. We're just going to send it some things. Now, when we set this up, we have to tell it, well, what data are you going to give me? So we can either give it a schema, but I'm super lazy. So my favorite thing is just give me a sample and I'll figure it out. So I give it a sample. It's super complicated because that's all the stored procedure needed. I need the registration number of the aircraft. Everyone loving AZR? Wouldn't that be a great registration? Okay, so I do that. there's a nice little step there, comes built into logic apps for executing stored procedures in SQL. I give it the right parameters. I pick the procedure name, it populates for me. And then I take the registration parameter that it's given me and I pass it to the stored prop. That's all I've got to do. Then I can run it and give it some example input. See there, and we can see here on the output it gave me back nice long list of JSON. Yeah, we've got super lightweight, super quick API. Cool. So we've got SQL, we've got a stored proc, we've got a logic app. How do I expose that to APIM? Well, personally, I'd click the button that says create it from an Azure Logic app. Kind of funny like that. So we go through, it will find them all. I can customize the URLs. I'm lazy, I'm not going to worry. I am going to add some versioning though, so I can have different versions of this API. And I click go. It's done. Okay. I can go into test this thing. So again, I can give it a sample payload, call the API, which we'll call the logic app, which we'll call the database, and away we go. Obviously, APIM has enormous amount of functionality I could use here. For example, I could define a policy that said, hey, just cache this response for 10 minutes. You know, the planes, we don't have that big a fleet. They're not landing that often. If you ask me about the number of flights this particular plane has done, it's probably the same as it was 10 minutes ago. So just cache it. All those kind of things. I could rate limit to make sure we don't get things. All sorts of things I could do. Not going to do it. So we've got APIM, got it protected. We've got all that good governance there. Now I need to get it somehow into Power Platform. Again, I kind of like pressing the button that says Power Platform. So you'll notice in a lot of Azure services, if you have a look, there's now a Power Platform button. So for example, there's one in SQL. When you go into the SQL blade and click on a database, it'll say, hey, do you want to create a Power App based on the data in your? So it's very easy to get to. So we click on that. It says, fantastic. Which Power Apps environment do you want to publish to? So this is the one I've created and using. What do you want to call it? Done. So when we jump back over to our Power Apps thing, just like before we had a connector for Excel, we had a connector that went to the Dataverse when we created that table. Now we have a connector for that API. And then when I go in, whatever she wants to do, same sort of gallery control, but this time we say, hey, get this data from the API. You would pass it a parameter based on the previous. So pretty straightforward. Oh, bugger, where is he now? Oh, he's over Suncorp. Okay, he's getting close. All right. Oh. Yeah, can we see us maybe? Oh, there's Suncorp. Oh, there we go. Here we are. Okay. So, he's a bit faster than I thought he'd be. All right. He's on a scenic tour. That's what they do. He's flying IFR. I follow roads. Okay. So we kind of started with some really, absolute plumb, no code, just you need to involve a developer. But I think by the time we've done that, now we see the third scenario where we've actually integrated something like that. Admittedly, in a quick, easy way, but this is an MVP. But all the bits we've used are those bits of Azure we're familiar with. So now it doesn't matter to us that it's Power Apps calling us. We can still apply our policies and governance. I can still do my Kubernetes or my web app or my logic app or my Azure function. Doesn't matter. So what I do want to do though is just, before he lands, I think we've got time, is just kind of cut through a couple of things we saw earlier in the platform and how they, from the back end, hook into Azure. So I mentioned this Dataverse and why I was excited about it. So Dataverse is actually a really rich data platform. You can think of it, the way they position it is it's the no-code data store, right? Whatever you're doing, you can do things. So, for example, it has authentication or authorization built in. So I can choose based on the user type, hey, which entities can they go and edit? All those kind of things. We get a full audit trail. We can have some simple, kind of business logic. We can calculate fields and whatever, and the user can just get the values. All those kind of good stuff. And as we go out though, these things start to get more familiar. Okay, so by the time we get out here to the storage, you'll see it's using the kind of regular data services we're used to. And then at the very extreme, the integration points is all the stuff we love to use building things in Azure, right? Whether that's, event hubs, a webhook, which means you can basically call anything, SQL, data lake, all those kind of good things. And the Dataverse itself is actually built on all the Azure services, so it's all there. And as we said, it then hooks into all those things so that you can extend them. Now, the way we can integrate from the Azure side going back, the Dataverse has APIs, because you've got to have APIs. So that's great. We can just call APIs and get things. We can adopt an event-based system. So if you want to use Service Bus or Event Hubs or Logic Apps, whatever you want to use, you can do that. Or you can also write plugins. It's like, really? We couldn't come up with another name. We came up with Dataverse, but we're still going to call them plugins. You can write code that runs inside Dataverse, so C# code and all sorts of other good things to add functionality into there. I think of that as like supercharged stored procs and functions and all those good things you used to do.
Business logic.
It's not a database table. See, that's the thing. Don't think of the table. Doesn't mean you should. But you saw before, you can write, even with the native functionality, you can write business rules and automations and things. So you're already putting business logic. Because remember, you're thinking like a developer, right? Don't think like a developer. But that does raise the point, right? Should they do that? Maybe, maybe not. If there isn't an API they can call which would implement their business logic, maybe that's the way to go until you have an API. And for our data friends to get super excited, you can do a continuous export from Dataverse into Azure Synapse. So you can do all your analytically stuff, and you're just using Synapse. So even though the workers or whoever is using Power Apps and being super productive and whatever, once it gets to you, it's just Synapse data. You don't care where it came from or how it got there. We've got to be out of time. Oh yeah, he's on final. Okay. Right, I did want to cover a few more things. Actually, he's super, super high on final, but that's okay. It's a long runway and a small plane. I think we'll be fine. So, kind of another kind of peel the hood back. Do you remember when we were doing the Power Apps, there was that little FX bar, and I kind of said it was like, if you're used to the Excel bar. So Power FX is the Microsoft language for no code, low code. I guess you can't have a language for no code. So let's call it low code. So in all of the parts of the Power Platform, you will see this Power FX, which is an open source language. Pretty simple to use. And I did mention, if you have a look at it, it's actually pretty clever. So for the last couple of years, that's why I asked the question about Haskell. If anyone knows Simon Patton-Jones, the guy who invented Haskell. So he's been working in Microsoft research for a few years and pretty much dedicated to implementing modern languages inside Excel. So over the time, they've been modernizing it. For example, it has Lambda. You can do Lambda functions because if you think about it, spreadsheets are kind of a weird use case. Everything's already a little atomic bit of data and you manipulate it by doing functions on things. So effectively what we now have in Excel and by virtue Power FX in the Power Platform is a functional programming language if you look at all the parts it has. So if you get anyone who's super excited about functional programming, ask them about Excel. They'll probably kill you. But it means it's super powerful and it's super easy to use. And as Simon pointed out, there's a few magnitudes more people who know how to use Excel formulas than they do JavaScript. Okay. So very, very interesting. So kind of tying that all back together. Kind of started with the Power Platform bit, and there was probably skepticism in the room, and I'll put my hand up too. I was pretty skeptical because I missed the point. I think it took me a long time and I'm still wrapping my head around it. But the idea of no code, low code platforms is not necessarily for developers to be more productive. This is Todd's opinion. I'm putting it there now. We certainly can use it, but the power of this is when we have other people building parts of the app. So if you think back to the beginning, we've got a shortage of developers. We can train more developers. Okay, we can do that. One of the other things we can do is expand who is a developer or who can develop. Right. So now all those people who write the incredible spreadsheets and do all the things in offices that keep them all humming can actually be part of the app solution. Right. Not the whole thing, but bits of it. We can also carve off bits. So for example, if I'm building an API that needs to talk to that SQL database, how am I going to maintain the data in that database? Do I go off and build a CRUD app? Or why don't I get, I remember John, to go and build a Power App just to maintain the data? He's the one that's going to maintain it, not me. Why don't I get him to do that and I'll build the API? So there's lots of interesting scenarios as to how these things fit together. And then the other part is behind the scenes. Traditionally, when we build apps, you know, show my age again, you got your web server and you got your database. There you are, you're good. Go and build your app. Whereas now when we're building cloud native apps, it's a real polyglot kind of approach. We use different data sources for different parts of the application, depending on what fits. So we can extend that range of data services to include Dataverse. And as we saw, we can export from Dataverse to Synapse. We can trigger things based on events, both in terms of Dataverse creating events for us to consume, but also Dataverse can respond to things. So for example, a new table gets, a row in a table gets updated, we can go and trigger something to happen in Dataverse. So that starts to make it a bit more interesting of a scenario. So really, I guess what we're kind of seeing is, up until quite recently, lots of stuff being built in low code, especially during the pandemic, right? Just exploded that out of all proportion, right? As people realize all of a sudden, hey, people need to do things when they're not at their desk. We need to be able to change things rapidly. And it's usually also not about changing the thing. How do we test the thing? Because, you know, Chris Matthew, that tends to take a bit longer than the changing of the thing. One change, you know, an hour change might be a week's worth of testing. So it helps with a lot of problems. But they've largely been operating in that silo, right? There hasn't necessarily been a lot of integration. Yes. Yes. But also remember how much, when you change things, I'm not changing code here, right? So again, more of the responsibility has shifted to the platform. So I guess the surface area for me to stuff something up or have unintended consequences, because I'm doing things, all those sort of functions in the Power App are defined down at that little functional level.
So somebody grabbing an Excel spreadsheet, building Power Up on an Excel spreadsheet.
I didn't say I'm not good with that.
I'm remarkably 100% good with that, but it gets really weird when you start to look at the Dataverse function. It's still trying.
It's tough. And I was talking before, I went down to Sydney a few weeks ago for my peers all around Australia, and we'd been all on our own kind of getting more into this and doing more technical training. And we almost universally had the same experience. It took us 6 weeks or so of doing it to stop thinking like a developer. It's a different mindset, right? We kept trying to think in, okay, I'm going to write this bit of code and it doesn't work like that, right? It's about, I'm going to define the property for this one little thing. And that's the only thing I'm going to touch. It doesn't change anything else except that one little thing. Doesn't mean you should build everything in Dataverse or whatever, but it is a different mindset. And that's actually one of the challenges, because I painted this great picture of, hey, we're going to collaborate and do all these things. They're really different mindset. To me, it's a little bit like it's the DevOps thing all over again, right? We've got developers and we've got ops and we've built this great tooling, but culturally, they might think very differently and work very differently. And that's a journey to go on. And I kind of picture this the same. So if you look at how long it's taken us to, I won't say solve this DevOps, but get anyway good at DevOps. And if anyone thinks DevOps is easy, I'd like to see how. But again, it isn't the technology part that's tricky. Usually, it's the culture and the control structures and all the other bits that go with it. But I guess where we're kind of heading to is what they're terming fusion development, right? So that's not so much about a pro developer using low-code tools now. This is about how do we get all those people, rather than just doing a wireframe and send it to a coder and then come back and test it, how can we actually get them to build maybe the app or turn their app into a design so we can get there super fast and test it? And just to kind of give you an example, because I mean, obviously we'd be talking very simple, trivial examples, but this is one of a real system, right? Where, you know, we've got a customer who's using, you know, they've got their IoT and all this kind of good data they've got coming in, and they've got stuff on the edge and all that super productive stuff that's been done by developers and really secure. But then when they want to respond to specific events, right, that might change, that's where they're going, hey, well, let's introduce some of the Power Platform to do that, right? So we might, you know, when a particular thing happens, maybe we trigger a Power Automate, and then we have a bot agent. It depends on the scenario, right? But the idea here was, you know, a delivery. Imagine you're running a big delivery network, and all of a sudden there was a severe weather event, which was going to probably delay packages in particular areas. So using that AI, you would detect that, and then maybe rather than have someone send them an email, you might use a Power Virtual Agent to actually reach out to the customer on your app and start, you know, saying, hey, just want to let you know, really bad weather, you know, upstream, we'll get to you as soon as we can. So it starts to look at what different ways you can expose the app. If you're just building a web app and an email, then probably doesn't matter. But it starts to do things, particularly when you start to think about other ways to surface this stuff. So I'm sure you've seen Power Apps and things can be, for example, surfaced in Teams. But one of the preview things they announced to build was the ability to do that in Outlook within an email by detecting that you want to do something. So let's say you send an email, and rather than sending an email that says, hey, go to this system and fill in this form in your timesheet or blah, 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 the part of that app they need to deal with actually just appears in Outlook, right? Which starts to be all of a sudden, we can actually take bits of these apps and put them into where people are working rather than making them go somewhere else. Depends on the situation, but it is interesting. Now, hopefully everyone wants to go and try some of this stuff. One of the challenges with Power Apps has been up until now the licensing, because it's a product like O365, all of those things. Okay, but you can go and sign up for a Power Apps dev plan for free. That will give you data. So all the stuff you saw today I've been running on the free stuff. So that all works, and that's all super good. There is also a really good, if you go to Microsoft Learn, there's actually a learning path about Fusion development for developers, and it literally takes you through a scenario like I've done here and goes, okay, we're going to walk through, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. So I recommend that. And then they have an accompanying free ebook as well, and a GitHub repo. So if you prefer a book kind of approach, you can do all that kind of thing. And then obviously I'll share these deck later, but there's lots and lots of good learning slide about the bits. So, oh, he's made it. Okay, there we go. He's in Brisbane. So I guess my take on this is not a silver bullet. Okay. Unlike the ad from 95, you know, no more damn code. It's like, no, that's not where we are. But if you think about all the things we've done over the last, I'm going to show my age now, 20, 30 years, you know, there was a time when I built an app, and I can almost guarantee you a web app, the first thing I was going to do was write a SQL script that said something like create table user, because we did our own user authentication and authorization, right? And then .NET came along with some frameworks that was fabulous because it created the table for you. Didn't have to create, there's still a table in your app, right? We'd never dream of doing that now. I hope we would never dream of doing that now, right? We hand that off to an identity provider like AAD or Okta or whoever, right? So that's something we realize, hey, that doesn't add value. We shouldn't be doing that. Similarly, when we use, you know, open source packages, you know, I shouldn't be writing a whole lot of code that deal with reading text files. There's libraries for that. I should go and get that. Okay. And then we use things like Azure Functions where, hey, it's got a binding mechanism. I don't need to worry about how to talk to SQL or how to write out to there. I can just focus on my business code. Or if you're writing microservices, you might be using Dapper to say, hey, I don't want to worry about the intricacies of service bus. I just need to send a pub sub message and it will take care of it. So we've done lots and lots of stuff as developers and architects to reduce the amount of code we need to write in the first place, but also to leverage great stuff that's already been done. So where I see, again, Todd's opinion, where I see this fitting is the same thing. Where are scenarios or bits of functionality we can carve off so that we don't have to do because it's not it doesn't deliver best value. You know, yes, I can go and build a mobile app and do all those things, But literally, if it's for someone who walks around a plane and does that, why wouldn't you do it in 30 seconds? Compared to what would a project cost to get someone on to build that? And all those little things add up. So it's just another way that we can try and deal with that. Hey, we've got millions of developers we don't have.
To take a spreadsheet. That's what most of the businesses use. And
VBA, with VBA.
well, let's leave the VBA. Just imagine it's a spreadsheet. How much effort is it to go, here's a spreadsheet, take it and the data and the database. So
Oh,
I'm
not hard at all.
assuming that the database can have a little
But-
bit more governance than just.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And a spreadsheet is still a spreadsheet, right? You still have issues with, if you're doing something at scale, that's not going to work. You're going to multiple people, but you could move it to database. You could move it to SQL. You could move it to table storage. You could do a lot of things.
Spreadsheets hosted through. For SharePoint. Use a dirty word.
Yeah.
Spreadsheets hosted through SharePoint. Like I've seen a lot of large websites running on spreadsheets via those APIs that are automatically generated out of SharePoint. You can run large customer bases on that. So
Yeah.
like they can do good until somebody actually renames the spreadsheet.
Correct.
Folder, and then,
Correct.
then
Absolutely.
your production website fails.
Absolutely. So that's why I was saying it isn't a silver bullet. This isn't just, you don't need to do that stuff anymore. It's where does it make sense to do it? The admin CRUD scenario is the one that comes to me all the time. The number of projects that I've been on that you end up writing probably 4 times as much code to deal with CRUD as you do with the actual customer facing app.
Plays in that.
Yes and no.
Just perpetuated, exacerbated the access problem, because the problem with access is,
We've enabled it.
well, yeah, and some organisations in their standard operating plan, because the problem with access is someone does a good job on one bespoke little business function, and then it gets added on, there's another bit, and there's another bit, and then suddenly you have a 20-page, 20-form access database perpetuating and absolutely critical to the entire business functions. Or if you've got the same scenario here, you're setting in a mindset of, here's your no code, low code. Oh, I've got this wonderful thing, blah, blah, blah. Oh, Jenny, can you add this function to blah, blah, blah. And then a poor developer has to come in and then look at everything under the hood. And then Purview with a bit of data governance and DLP will probably nail it in a few places as well as your fault. So great products. I don't believe that alone will stop the problems that we've had.
That's exactly my point. It isn't a lot. It's a tool in the toolbox, right? So one huge difference, obviously, from Access, the scope of Access was the access file. It was literally an isolated file.
.NET, you have the access file and at the runtime.
But what for the people who came along and built app,
Yeah.
the people we're talking about didn't do that, right? They just went into the forms designer and built an app thing, right? So absolutely, that's still a risk. And that was my first reaction about a year ago when I went through this. How is this not access? And it's taken me that long to go through it. If you have a look at let's say we're storing things in Dataverse, then there are policies you put in place. There are testing frameworks for it. There is a whole ALM process for it so that you can, all this stuff, even though we've gone through the GUI here, and actually I didn't call that out, but if you have a look at the announcements from Build, a lot of them were enabling technologies for that Fusion development. So like the connectors we created by going click, click, click can now be done as code and put in source control. So you can do that. So there's a lot of announcements that were about, hey, here's all these, a bit like Logic Apps, right? You can go into Logic Apps and go click, 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 click. Dan, should you do that in production? I'm thinking probably not. The same for API management. You can go into API management and go click, click, click. Should you do that? No. All right. So there is options there, but at the same time, it's that conversation. So you say, like in scenario 3, we said, hey, That's a system. We didn't expose that SQL database to the app. We said, here's the API. Here's what you can do, right? And that's, yes, there's policies and put in place, but the idea here is like DevOps, right? That's a cultural thing. You know, the idea here is, you know, for the business person to say, hey, I'm building this app. Can you give me this data? And they go, well, look, we'll go to APIM. Here's our API schedule. You go crazy. Oh, it's not there. Okay, let's put in a request to see if we can create a new API. So all that kind of process and culture, that's got to be, and that's why this idea of fusion teams, right? It's not, the technology is great, but just like with DevOps isn't CI/CD, right? It's about how do you change the culture? Yes, you need that, but it's the cultural thing you need to change as well to actually get the learning and get the value from it. And I think of this stuff kind of the same way.
Even Azure, it's kind of like you can go into the Azure portal and go click, 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 click. Or you can use DevOps, and then you ask the question, what percentage of companies uses DevOps? And one. Is it even?
I think you'd be surprised. But again, flip it round to flip it around the other way though. Remember what I started about the business value. Take COVID. Anyone from, you know what I mean? Like that, something that was literally developed and deployed over a weekend with an actual governance model that had HIPAA data requirements and the whole thing. You couldn't do that any other way, right? So there.
And I think that's really good. That's where I come back to. It's like I'm sold on the, here's a spreadsheet, here's my power app, kick it out the door and I'm using this. And it's kind of like completely rogue, worse scenario than access, because now the whole internet has got access to this, right? So it's even worse than an access database. But apart from that, we can get it out there really cool. I'm all sold on that bit. Some people may not see.
Well, no, that's fine. But take the scenario, okay? If again, I keep coming back to scenario 3. I don't give them access to the database. I give them the APIs. How is that any different to any other web app team that's developing anything? They can only bugger up what the API allows them to bugger up.
With those canvas apps, you have to set business rules and diverse tables. Set different business rules to actually validate data and actually fill canvas app or data mode of the app that certain things are right. You have to fix it. So I suppose as a developer, rules platform, we need to sort of give them the developer developers that software development.
And it's a great example, right? And that doesn't mean you then wouldn't put validation in your API that they're calling. You absolutely would, right? In that case, the low code thing kind of becomes like a back end for, you know, a front end, back end for front end and all that kind of good stuff.
That's very good. The context of the appropriate use of the field and name, like you did, the equal identifier, the code there, you can have a string with 7 characters. That then you end up with this application that's been used for ages. Want to migrate off to Dataverse, but then the data quality management becomes a problem because hey, you've got all this development. In fact, you have problems like that. So the dilemma came with the schools management system was that people would use text fields not for the purpose for which they were intended. There was no validations or elements about. So all of a sudden you've got a whole swag of data that you don't know if that's confidential in there or something of that nature.
But you have that exact same problem for code.
No, you actually have, yeah, you do, but you do have some people who generally have some background and try and put controls in place and field validators and so on that use intelligence. I applaud